Chapter 1191. Battle of the Black Skull. The Nightmare Gate leading to the area of the Black Skull Citadel was located within the hunting grounds of a corrupted Titan. Sunny knew that. The Titan itself was a mysterious creature. The evacuation army did not possess a lot of information about it, simply because it was too dangerous of a task to observe the abomination. After losing several teams while trying to investigate the creature, even the elite scouts of the Special Reconnaissance Unit did not dare stalk it. All they knew about the corrupted Titan was that its movement patterns were erratic, that approaching it was suicidal, and that its powers had something to do with reanimating the dead. As long as the creature showed no sign of setting its sights on one of the siege capitals, the army simply monitored its general area of activity and kept away. Army Command had also taken steps to ensure that the corpses of the nightmare creatures slain around the siege capitals were promptly disposed of, to ensure that the Titan wouldn't be able to make use of them. However, the forces of the warring clans had brazenly invaded its territory, and now they were about to pay the price. Sunny was sure of it. Damnation! Staring at the worm crawling across his palm, he felt time slow down. Instantly, Sunny was overwhelmed by an animalistic, panicked desire to sever his hand before it was too late. He did not know what would happen if he didn't, and was terrified to find out. He was scared. There had been a time when Sunny felt fear often. At some point, however, he had developed a pretty high tolerance to terror, maybe because he had been exposed to it too much. These days, he sometimes felt disturbed, apprehensive, and wary, but very rarely truly afraid. He couldn't help but be afraid now, though. Looking at the gray worm, it was as though Sunny had been transported to a snowy field in the Antarctic center. The feeling of absolute, overwhelming powerlessness he had experienced there, it chilled him to the bone. Curse it! With a snarl, Sunny dissolved into the shadows, allowing the worm to fall to the ground. A split second later, he reappeared a few meters away, holding his sword in a defensive stance. All around, the battlefield was changing. The worms were crawling from the ground and burrowing into the corpses of the fallen, awakened, and slain nightmare creatures. Moments later, the corpses started to convulse. Some were even rising, moving like broken marionettes. What is this? Horrified, Sunny watched as the victims of the bloody battle were being brought back to life, or rather, to a perverted semblance of life. All kinds of wild thoughts flashed through his mind, from the instinctual desire to flee to the wild idea that it was Kai Song, the Queen of Worms, had personally descending into the waking world. But no, it couldn't be her. It was simply a corrupted Titan. It had to be. A creature like that was powerful but not indestructible. Skytide alone had battled the winter beast for weeks, months, even. If there had been 6 more saints supporting her, the abominable creature would have undoubtedly been slain. There were currently 7 saints present on the battlefield, 6 belonging to the great clans and Wake of Ruin. There were Sunny, Nephi's, Morgan, Mordred, and Sation as well. There was no reason for him to. Suddenly, the ground trembled and split. Hundreds of meters away, a gargantuan head rose from below it, the head of a revolting, giant worm. It crawled from the soil as if escaping hell, its long body not really a single hole, but instead a shape created by numerous slithering gray worms sticking together. A visage so ghastly that Sunny suddenly wanted to vomit. However, he didn't, because there were things only Sunny could see. Even though the giant body of the Titan was not an actual creature, but instead an amalgamation of countless smaller worms, he could see its soul cores. A scattering of radiant embers that continued to reveal themselves as the abominations crawled from underground. 3 were already in view, and 4 more would undoubtedly follow. Sunny felt something move in his chest, and allowed himself to be paralyzed by shock. But only for a second. Embers, embers, 7 embers. His eyes widened. Sunny was frozen for a moment and then whispered, All there is to war is power, an application of power. One has to be flexible when waging war. I have them exactly where I wanted them. That was what Morgan had said. He shivered. Of course. A corrupted titan would have had 7 soul cores, 7 corrupted soul cores. Its soul would have been permeated with abhorrent darkness stemming from 7 vile nodes. A transcendent titan, if such a thing existed, would have had 7 radiant spheres of light serving as the nexuses of its vast soul. The creature in front of him, however, had neither nodes of darkness nor radiant cores. Instead, it had 7 bright embers burning within its body, like a transcendent echo would. And Morgan had summoned 20 of those already. For some reason, the spell was obsessed with the number 7, and influenced by the spell, humans had begun to structure various things in 7s as well. So, wouldn't the Princess of Valor actually possess 21 transcendent echoes? That would be only logical. Finally, several things clicked together in Sunny's mind. The reason for Morgan's unexplainable confidence, her pretense of willingness to participate in a duel that had pushed Beastmaster into committing to a battle, the fact that the corrupted Titan's hunting grounds had shifted to encompass the Black Skull Nightmare Gate right after reinforcements had been sent through it by Whispering Blade. Sunny blinked. What a devious strategy. There wasn't, and had never been, a corrupted Titan. There was only an echo of one, a transcendent echo belonging to Morgan. She had unleashed it in East Antarctica and allowed it to roam free all that time. The echo had even destroyed several human outposts and killed every scout of the evacuation army sent to investigate it, until no more scouts were sent. All to make this moment possible. The Titan Echo had been supposed to protect the Nightmare Gate and seal access to Black Skull until it was captured by Clan Valor, but Mordred bypassed the worm entirely and made those plans useless. So, Morgan was forced to shift her strategy. Instead of betting on the Black Skull Citadel to carry her to the tomb of Ariel ahead of the competition, she used it as a lure to decimate Clan Song's forces on the battlefield. She had applied her power in a way most flexible indeed. Looking at the giant gray worm rising from the ground, Sunny suppressed a stifled laugh. What the hell am I supposed to be happy to see this revolting thing? Before the battle, Morgan had said that she would have been certain of Valor's victory if not for Mordred's reflections. Now that her final echo had revealed itself, Sunny finally understood what she meant. The arrival of the Worm Titan instantly changed the situation on the battlefield, but even such a creature was not enough to spell certain defeat for the forces of Clan Song. A mere corrupted Titan would not have been able to doom the monstrous beings gathered on the desolate Antarctic plain today, and an echo of one was tremendously powerful, but not nearly as dreadful as the real thing would have been. So even though the situation had changed, the outcome of the battle still hung in fragile balance. The dead were rising to assist the outnumbered warriors of valor. The main body of the echo itself had to be dealt with as well. Instead of quelling the furious bloodshed, the arrival of the abominable worm only seemed to drive the chaos to a new, inconceivable level. One thing it did manage to achieve instantly, though, was force Beastmaster to finally reveal herself. Sunny felt her presence before he saw her. It was as though an invisible hammer fell from the sky, pressing every soldier of Clan Valor into the ground. The awakened, who had been fighting with indomitable resolve up until now, suddenly staggered and swayed. Their movements grew sluggish and strained. Arg! Sunny gritted his teeth as he shook off the effects of the mental assault. Even his incredible resistance against mind attacks had been insufficient to fully deflect Beastmaster's diabolical power. The poor warriors of Clan Valor stood no chance against it. Their only saving grace was that the enchantress was forced to spread herself thin, to influence 1,000 powerful awakened at the same time. Their concentration was broken, and their strength was severely diminished, but at least they survived. If the task in front of the daughter of Kai Song had been less enormous, she would have probably managed to either subjugate them or outright shatter their minds. The most frightening thing about it, though, was that the ordinary warriors were not even her main target. Sunny saw it from the corner of his eye, but once he did, he couldn't look away. Beastmaster appeared on the battlefield, standing calmly in front of the ravaged span of it where Whispering Blade had been fighting against the reflections. Sunny did not know if she had used her transformation ability, but for some reason, the alluring saint looked even more beautiful than she usually did, so much more. Before, Beastmaster's beauty was mesmerizing, but now it was simply ruinous. She was so breathtaking that looking at her was actually painful. It was as though Sunny's soul was bleeding. Damn it! As the beautiful demoness took a step forward, the four reflections that had been fighting Whispering Blade dashed away to confront the titanic worm. Beastmaster did not wield any weapons and her enemy could not be seen. The ground around her suddenly exploded and she was obscured by a cloud of dust. Something moved within that cloud, and a devastating shockwave spread outward, sending awakened warriors and enthralled nightmare creatures flying. A moment later, there was another explosion. Sunny had entertained ideas of eliminating the demonic enchantress, but looking at her bizarre clash with Madoc, one using ethereal mental attacks, the other invisible swords, he was suddenly not sure that he was qualified. How was he supposed to intrude upon a battle that he could not even perceive? Later. For now, he still had an unfinished task. The dead had risen to support the warriors of valor, but Beastmaster's calamitous assault had restored the lethal equilibrium between the two fighting forces. The titanic echo was clashing with the four reflections, and Saint Tyrus was still in danger. He dashed forward, using the Sin of Solace to cut down one of the masters who had attacked him before, the one capable of creating javelins of compressed air. The spell whispered into his ear, and at the same time the cursed sword laughed at him from the other side. Ignoring both, Sunny fought his way through the ring of enemies surrounding Sky Tide and arrived at her side. Saint Tyrus was on one knee in the middle of a pile of corpses, her armor battered and broken. Her sword was covered in a net of cracks, and her golden hair was sticking to her face, painted red by blood. Nevertheless, her amber eyes were as calm and severe as always, full of grave resolve and unbreakable will. But they were full of pain and exhaustion, too. She couldn't have been all right after bearing the brunt of Beastmaster's power for so long. Sunny cursed and threw himself forward, colliding with a corrupted thrall that was bringing down its stinger on Sky Tide's cracked sword. The two of them fell to the ground, and the Sin of Solace hissed, slicing through the abomination's tail. There was no retaliation from the nightmare creature, because Saint Tyrus had pierced its neck a split second later. While Sunny was recovering, she pulled her sword out of the thrall's corpse and braced it to block an aspect ability attack made by one of Song's Ascended. Sky Tide's sword let out a low ring and shattered, instantly turning into a rain of radiant sparks. She was tossed back and grunted, spitting out a mouthful of blood. "You bastards!" Sunny was already back on his feet, full of dark fury. He quickly assessed the situation and reluctantly suppressed his desire to slaughter everyone in sight. Cutting down the minions of Clan Song would have been enjoyable, but there were too many of them around, and they were too powerful. He could face them, and he could defend Saint Tyrus. But he wasn't sure that he could do both at the same time. For now, his priority was to ensure her safety. Gritting his teeth, Sunny called upon the shadows. Instantly, a wave of darkness rose from his feet, pushing the enemies away and solidifying into a tall wall. That wall was not going to hold them back for long, but it would at least buy him some time. He dashed toward Sky Tide and grabbed her by the shoulder, helping the saint balance herself. Her face was pale and marred by blood. Lady Tyrus, are you all right? He knew that it was a stupid question to ask, considering the situation, but he still couldn't help but ask it. She looked at him with a pained expression, and then a pale smile appeared on her lips. I'll live, you should. Sky Tide did not finish the sentence. Sunny saw something reflecting in her eyes, and then she suddenly pushed him away. As Sunny flew back, he felt the wall of shadows he had created explode. A split second later, monstrous claws tore through the spot he had been standing on. The ground shook from the terrible impact, and a vast cloud of dust rose into the air. Those claws belonged to a towering creature that filled Sunny with a sense of dread. The creature looked like an abominable hybrid between a human and a wolf. Even hunched, it was at least 4 meters tall, with terrifying fangs and bestial eyes that were full of wicked fury. The beast radiated a feeling of wildness, savage power, and primal ferocity. Dire Fang had arrived to finish off the fallen saint of the White Feather clan. Not good. Sunny landed in a roll and instantly dashed to the side. Almost at the same moment, claws tore through the air, almost brushing against his skin. They were so close that he felt the wind stirring as it threw his hair into disarray. Fast! Sunny landed on his feet and slid backwards. Sensing the movement of shadows, he raised the Sin of Solace to block the attack, not because he actually perceived it, but because he knew that it had to come. Then he screamed. A deafening, inhuman, monstrous roar suddenly split the skis apart, and Sunny's head was instantly pierced by pain so intense that he couldn't help but to groan. What the hell is that? A sonic attack? As his vision blurred, the strike that he had predicted came. The Sin of Solace was in the way, but it was not in a position to form a solid block. Sunny's whole body shook as he was thrown back once again, his bones and tendons creaking under immense pressure. Luckily, they did not burst apart. But it really, really hurt. Falling to the ground, Sunny dove into the shadows and flew out of them a couple dozen meters away. He barely had time to grab St. Tyrus and carry her forward with his momentum before Dire Fang's claws tore into her battered armor. The two of them came to a stop some distance away and froze for a moment, supporting each other. Sunny's breathing was hoarse, and Sky Tide's face was ashen. In front of them, the towering monster, St. Dire Fang, who had finally unleashed his transcendent power, slowly turned his wolf-like snout and looked at them with a bestial, blood-red, terrifying eye. Sunny's intuition was screaming. Looking at the monstrous creature, half human, half beast, he felt it, deep in the dark expanse of his lightless soul. Death. Fighting Dire Fang meant death. A saint was a saint after all. In terms of raw power, a transcendent human was similar to a corrupted nightmare creature. Although humans possessed only one soul core, their intelligence and aspect powers made them equal to devils. At least, someone like Beastmaster seemed closer to a terror even. Sunny had fought and killed many corrupted abominations. But despite the similarity, saints were nothing like the creatures he had killed. That had nothing to do with raw power, and everything to do with who they were. Saints had to conquer 5 hells to transcend: the first nightmare, the second nightmare, the third nightmare, the dream realm, and the waking world. Countless humans had tried, but only the absolute best of the absolute best could survive all 5 of these impossible trials. The strongest, the bravest, the smartest, the most determined, the most skilled, the most adaptable, the most lucky. By far, only a person possessing all these qualities could become a saint. Even with the interference of the great clans, nothing less would do. So, facing a saint was not comparable to facing a random, corrupted abomination. Facing a saint was like facing one of the strongest corrupted abominations in existence. A fiend among fiends. Dire Fang was not alone either. There were several ascended of clan song and powerful thralls surrounding them, too. Curse it all. Sunny suppressed the desire to take a step back, knowing that they would not be able to run. His eyes grew dim and bleak. He hesitated for a heartbeat, and then glanced at Sky Tide. If he went all out, using Shadow Shell and every other trick at his disposal, it would probably still not be enough. His last desperate gamble was the Mirror of Truth, but Sunny was not sure that it would be of any help, not before both of them were torn apart by Dire Fang at least. He trembled. "Lady Tyrus, I don't know what to do." She looked at him, her bloodied face remaining calm and composed. Her voice was steady, too. "Of course you do. You have to flee." Sunny gritted his teeth. Yes, retreat was always an option. He was a great master of staying alive, after all. He could dissolve into shadows and emerge from them hundreds of meters, or even a few kilometers away from the dreadful saint. He could become one of the shadows as well, and thus immune to all physical damage. That was how he had survived on that snowy field in the Antarctic center, after all. The problem was that he couldn't take anyone with him. And so Sky Tide's meaning was clear. She was telling him to leave her and save himself. But Sunny, he didn't want to, and so he was not going to. There was no time for conversations, really, so he simply raised his sword and snarled, "Like hell I will." In the next moment, the monstrous figure of Dire Fang turned into a gray blur. He was moving too fast for Sunny to trace where the attack would come from. Even Shadow Sense could not keep up with the bestial saint, and so all Sunny could do was guess. Crap! He summoned the shadows again, trying to build another wall around them. However, it was smashed apart before receiving the chance to solidify. He tried to block the attack of the Transcendent with the Sin of Solace again. However, it was pushed aside with disheartening ease. He put himself between Dire Fang and St. Tyrus. Arg! Sunny felt his throat being ripped open by a sharp claw. He reeled back and grabbed his mutilated neck, feeling blood flow through his fingers like a river. Damn it, that hurts. He used the dying wish to heal the lethal wound, exhausting the accumulated charge of the transcendent charm. It was still not enough to change the situation. The monstrous beast was already lunging to deliver another attack, and this time. Before Sunny could react, a blinding flash suddenly illuminated the world, and the gray blur lunging at them was suddenly swallowed by an explosion of white flames. At the same time, a figure wielding a slender rapier appeared in front of the Ascended of Clan Song. She moved between them like an apparition, deflecting a rain of attacks with measured elegance and strange, seemingly irrational ease. Cassie pulled the attention of the enemy masters and thralls, while Nephi's positioned herself between Dire Fang and Sunny. The towering beast emerged from the flames. Wisps of white fire were dancing on his fur, but he did not appear burned. The saint bared his fangs in a murderous grin. Looking up at the towering monstrosity, Nephi's calmly brought her radiant longsword into a high guard. "Sunny, are you all right?" He sighed. "Damn, it is indeed a stupid question to ask." Sunny let out a terse breath. "Yeah, I'm fine, just got my throat ripped out, no big deal." He lowered his bloodied hand, revealing the wound that had already disappeared thanks to the Death Wish enchantment. There was a lot of blood on his neck and the black silk of the Shroud of Dusk, but under it, his skin and flesh were perfectly fine. A corner of Neff's mouth curled upward. "I see." Then she looked at Dire Fang with a severity that seemed cold enough to freeze a person to death, and said calmly, "In that case, Lady Sky Tide, please fall back with Song of the Fallen. Master Sunless and I will remain to cover your retreat." St. Tyrus was in no condition to face Dire Fang in battle. Even if she wanted to stay, her presence would only slow the two of them down. She seemed to have understood that as well. Even if she didn't, Sunny was not sure that Sky Tide was in a position to refuse Neff's orders. She was a vassal of Clan Valor after all, and Nephi's was technically of the same status as Morgan. Cassie, take her. There was nowhere really safe on the battlefield, but getting closer to the main body of Valor's force, and away from the most dangerous enemies, would increase Sky Tide's chances of survival by a lot. Cassie was facing two masters of Clan Song. Her rapier did not seem to move very swiftly, but somehow it was always where it needed to be to deflect their attacks. The blind girl moved with measured cadence, always half a step ahead of her enemies. Although her face remained calm, the two ascended seemed shaken. Shaken enough to make a mistake. Just at that moment, one of them summoned his aspect ability to turn the ground under Cassie's feet into treacherous mud, while the other committed to a powerful thrust of his sword. However, the blind girl lightly jumped just a split second before her footing would have been lost in wet sludge, avoiding being momentarily immobilized. Her rapier shot forward, piercing the neck of the swordsman who had been counting on his partner's aspect to stall the enemy. At the same time, something flashed through the air, and the quiet dancer came to a halt above her shoulder, its blade marred by blood. Both masters silently fell down. Their bodies crumbled to the ground almost at the same exact moment as Cassie landed from her jump, one rapier in hand and another hovering above her shoulder. She swiftly moved, evading a frenzied attack of a corrupted thrall, and appeared next to Saint Tyrus. Without saying a word, the blind girl grabbed Sky Tide by the shoulder and pulled her away. Dire Fang, surprisingly, allowed all of that to happen without moving a muscle. He simply stared at Nephi's from above as the white flames died down on his fur, motionless, with an indifferent expression on his bestial face. Sunny was curious about what the gloomy saint was thinking, but at the same time, he didn't really care to know. Soon enough, the three of them were left facing each other, the towering monstrosity on one side, Sunny and Nephi's standing shoulder to shoulder on the other. It brings back memories. The situation was entirely different, and the enemy was entirely different. The two of them were entirely different as well. So much had changed, and yet he couldn't help but feel as if they were back under the branches of the Soul Devourer, looking up at the carapace demon and preparing to bring the enormous abomination down. Dire Fang's snout moved, and suddenly a deep, reverberating voice escaped from it, making Sunny's bones tremble. "You are Broken Sword's daughter." Nephi's tilted her head a little, then answered calmly. "I am." Red sparks swirled around her head, forming into a helmet. The monstrous beast grinned. "Shame." With that, he roared and lunged forward. Somewhere else on the battlefield, piles of corpses were moving, coming back to life. Constant shockwaves from the distant clash between the Titan Echo and the four reflections were shaking the ground, making it seem as if the world was on the verge of crumbling to dust. There were awakened echoes and enthralled abominations tearing each other apart. The soil was soaked with blood, and more bodies fell into the red sludge every moment. A bolt of lightning flashed, and a thunderclap rolled across the desolate plain, soon drowning in the clangor of the battle. The first drops of heavy rain fell down. In the midst of all this chaos, covered in blood, a young man in battered armor coldly pulled his sword from the body of an awakened warrior, threw the corpse aside, and turned around. A slender young woman clad in a suit of black armor, with a red cape draped around her shoulders, reflected in his strange, mirror-like eyes. The two of them looked so much alike that they could be mistaken for twins. Morgan calmly dismissed her cape, allowing it to disintegrate into a rain of scarlet sparks. Raising her sword and pointing it at Mordred, she pierced him with a sharp gaze and smiled. "Let's get it over with, monster. Play whatever dirty tricks you have left, and then we can settle it once and for all with our swords." Mordred stared at her for a moment, then glanced at the distant shape of the gargantuan worm. "Dirty tricks, huh? "Ah, but I don't have any of those left." His sister smirked with contempt. "Please forgive me if I don't believe you." Mordred shook his head and took a step forward, his face devoid of the usual lightness. "Don't get me wrong, I could have prepared a few, but that would be so unsatisfying, don't you think? Dear sister, you shouldn't assume that I want to kill you with my own two hands any less than you want to kill me. What's the point of killing you with a trick? Then you'll just die thinking, there he goes, doing something contemptible again. No, no, no. I want to kill you, all of you, with what you pride yourself on most. I want to crush you all." Morgan grinned. "So what? You are really going to fight me with a sword? Have you lost the last bits of your broken mind, creature? You don't stand a chance." Mordred took another step back and gritted his teeth. "We'll see." His usually calm voice was suddenly distorted by a vast, dark, incinerating hatred. A hatred so hot it could melt the abyss. Morgan stopped smiling and walked toward him with a calm expression. "Do you still think that you can escape? I'll have to disappoint you. When this body of yours is destroyed, there will be no escape. You have already spent, what was it, 6, 7 years, locked in a box. This time we've built a better one. This time you'll stay locked forever." Finally, a mad smile appeared on Mordred's face. "We'll see about that too." A split second later, the clangor of two clashing swords drowned out the cacophony of the battle. Somewhere else on the battlefield, a taciturn shadow was fighting a blindingly radiant reflection. And somewhere else, the legendary Whispering Blade was fighting the beautiful demoness, Beastmaster. A giant black panther was tearing a figure woven out of sunlight into shreds with her claws. Her reflection was furiously trying to shake off a small figure of black steel from its hide, while the small figure stubbornly held on. Soul Reaper jetted aimed her glaive at a monstrous visage of Song Sation, her leather armor riddled with holes. The monster facing her wiped the blood off her lips and spat, as if tasting something disgusting. A blind girl was fighting through a mass of enthralled nightmare creatures to guide a battered saint to safety. A revolting creature made out of countless gray worms was being slowly destroyed by 4 cracked reflections. As the gray sky broke with a torrent of rain, the ruinous battle exploded into a nightmare of violence. The world had grown darker under the veil of tumultuous thunderclouds, and torrents of water fell from the skies, bending like whips. Illuminated by a blinding flash of lightning, 2 humans dashed away from the claws of a towering beast. Nephis now. There was no real need for words. Sunny and Nephis might have grown distant as of late due to the choices they had made, but the core of their relationship was the same. They were battle partners first, and everything else second. That bond had been forged in fire, tears, and blood on the forgotten shore long before a shadow was cast on it by other matters. By now, their ability to act with seamless coordination was even higher than the unnatural unity granted to the warriors of valor by the forged swords. From the moment that the 2 of them had killed that first carapace scavenger together, Sunny and Nephis went through countless battles together. She had taught him how to wield the sword, while he taught her how to control her soul essence as a master. Despite everything, that bond would never change. Which was not to say that there was no other bond between them. The moment Dire Fang lunged forward, Sunny dashed to the right, while Nephis dashed to the left. At the same time, some of her radiance mixed with his shadows, while one of his shadows wrapped itself around her body. The sum of their powers was greater than its parts. The shadows and the brilliant light seemed to resonate with each other, making both of them stronger than they had any right to be. Sunny turned into a silhouette shrouded in broiling darkness, while Neph's radiance took on a darker hue. The darkness was permeated with blinding white light, while the light seemed to contain wisps of inexhaustible darkness. The light made the darkness deeper, while the darkness made the light much more stark and radiant. And there was more to it too. At least for Sunny. Unlike his shadows, which augmented all his physical attributes, Nef's flames ignited the soul, too. Wreathed in her fire, he could feel his essence become much more vibrant and warm. Much more potent. Ah, what a nice feeling. Nephise must have been using her full augmentation, and with the addition of Sunny's shadow, she was just fast enough to evade Dire Fang's claws. He, on the other hand, was just a little bit slower. Luckily, the Saint had chosen Changing Star as the primary target. Since he couldn't attack both of them at the same time effectively, the strike directed at Sunny was not as inescapable as it could have been. Sunny felt a slight sense of dissatisfaction. So what, we are back to that. Nef is the bait while I am the blade. He didn't like it one bit. In any case, Dire Fang had made a mistake, a very serious mistake. He shouldn't have paid less attention to Sunny. Because while his soul was aflame with Nef's radiance, a few of his abilities received a transformative boost as well, not the least because he could spend his essence more freely. Get ready, bastard. Nephise landed from her dodge and instantly pivoted, barely avoiding the beast's follow-up strike and slashing at his arm with her incandescent sword. At the same time, Sunny allowed himself to be buried under a wave of shadows. What emerged from them, however, was not a human, but a four-armed fiend clad in a suit of fearsome onyx armor. The creature was like a spawn of darkness, but its eyes burned with furious white radiance, and its mouth was like an incinerating furnace of white flame. The two of them had created distance between each other, and so Dire Fang could only face one at a time. That was why he was a fraction of a moment too late to react to Sunny's attack. Faster, faster, faster. The ground split and exploded under his clawed foot as Sunny pushed himself forward. The air, which was usually soft and unnoticeable, was suddenly like a wall. He broke through that wall. The drops of rain seemed to freeze in place as they fell. Sunny wanted to let out a scream, a roar, a battle cry. But he didn't, of course. Why would he announce his strike while attacking the enemy from behind? The sin of Solace fell silently. But Dire Fang was suddenly not in the place he had been a split second before. The towering beast had twisted, somehow, to avoid the transcendent blade, too swift to be seen. Sunny only felt the air being displaced by the Saint's massive body a heartbeat later. That was fine, too. He fell down, crouching on his four hands, and felt something tear through the empty space above. In the next moment, there was a blinding flash and an angry growl. Dire Fang might have been able to avoid Sunny's attempt at backstabbing him, but by doing so, he was forced to turn his back on Nephise. And Nephise, without wasting a single moment, used this chance to plunge her incandescent sword into the beast's hide. The towering creature disengaged and stopped for a moment, looking down. There, on its flank, a long wound could be seen through singed fur. Drops of blood were rolling down his side as they boiled. The laceration was shallow and not at all serious. However, Dire Fang had received a wound, no matter how small, while Sunny and Nephise had not. His bestial face contorted into a vicious snarl. The Saint did not say anything before launching into another attack. There was no need for words, and none of them had anything to say. Their swords, claws, and aspects would be doing the talking. A spirit of flame, a spawn of shadows, and a savage beast clashed in the middle of a terrifying battlefield. They were moving so fast that it was hard to see what was happening. Flowers of white fire bloomed in the middle of a pouring rain, and the ground shook from the fury of their murderous clash. Their battle was frenzied and turned everything around them into pure havoc, but it wasn't senseless. In fact, each of the three remained chillingly cold-blooded and calculating in the midst of the furious confrontation. Even while augmenting each other, Sunny and Nephise were much slower and weaker than the Saint of Clan Song, but not to the degree where he could instantly annihilate them. More importantly than that, there were two of them. Even if they were not Dire Fang's equals in terms of raw power, They could use their knowledge and understanding of each other to make up for the gap in strength. And so the battle raged on. Scores of strikes were exchanged in the span of a dozen seconds. The ground was broken and upturned. The rainwater mixed with the soil, turning it into mud. The mud was incinerated by the flames, turning into ash. For a few short moments, a fragile equilibrium seemed to have been created between the two masters and the saint. Astonishingly, Sunny and Nephi's had not been ripped to pieces by dire Fang, like a couple of Ascended should have been. They even managed to push him back. But Sunny was not very happy about the result. It was because he knew that this equilibrium would not last long. Right now, even while fighting at the absolute limit of their capabilities, both sides were carefully studying their adversary. The side that managed to glean the enemy's strengths and weaknesses first was going to win, while the side that failed was going to be killed. Well, how wonderful! In that regard, Sunny had an overwhelming advantage. As a practitioner of shadow dance, he was unrivaled when it came to learning everything about his enemies, be they humans, nightmare creatures, or saints. In the cacophony of the battle, obscured by roaring thunderclaps and the whisper of falling rain, two swords were creating a lethal melody of steel. Mordred knew that he was weaker than his younger sister. He was slower, too, and not nearly as resilient. He was even less skilled, perhaps. His powers were formidable, but they were useless against her. The King of Swords had made sure of that. His soul cores had been spent on creating the reflections, and those reflections were being spent on holding back her army. That army was also more powerful than the one on his side. Morgan had chosen the battlefield and lured the enemy into a trap. As a general, she had already succeeded. But she was not only a cunning strategist, she was a brilliant warrior, too. Morgan was like an unstoppable blade. She had everything that a princess of war was supposed to possess. She had power, talent, resolve, intelligence. She had the authority of their family and its favor as well. While Mordred had nothing, he had always had nothing. And everything he had tried to make his was either destroyed or taken away. However, despite all that, he was not going to lose. He was going to win. Die, you wretched thing. Their swords clashed, and even though Mordred had managed to read her intentions, he was still thrown back. His block was perfect, but it was not strong enough. He slid in the mud and let out a pained gasp. He was slightly dazed. Rain was falling all around them like a gray wall, and every drop was a mirror. The world was reflected on itself myriads of times, and all those reflected worlds flooded his mind like a kaleidoscope of horror. Every gruesome death, every desperate call for help, every selfless act of courage, every cowardly wail of defeat were reflected, multiplied, and projected into his head. It helped him to orient himself better on the chaotic battlefield, but it was also annoying. This was why he didn't like rain. Morgan was already closing in. Mordred grinned as he rose to face her. There she was, a beautiful young woman in a suit of black armor who looked so much like him. What did she know? She didn't know anything. She had been a mere child when their family decided to betray him, not even a sleeper. She had not been there when his original body was destroyed, or when he was locked in a cage like a beast. Morgan was not among those he wanted to kill the most. But she was their symbol. For Mordred, the young woman with a face that was eerily similar to his own, symbolized the great clan valor. She embodied everything that he wanted to destroy. And so, he was going to break her into pieces. Her sword flashed, cleanly cutting through the raindrops as it flew toward his body. He tried to deflect it, but it was of no use. The strike turned out to be a feint. A moment later, sharp pain pierced the left side of his face. Mordred stumbled back, feeling blood flow down his cheek. I think I lost an eye this time. Illuminated by the flash of lightning, Morgan's face remained impassive. Pathetic. Did her voice sound disappointed? Mordred smiled and raised his sword without saying anything. Usually this would be the time to implement a scheme, a cunning trick, a subtle deception, an unexpected reversal, something like that. He was a master of such things after all. But he was sincere when he said that there would be no tricks today. There was no point in destroying the symbol of valor with a trick. There would be no satisfaction either. His hatred would not be quenched. No, he was going to defeat her with nothing except his own body and blade. Because even after they had discarded him, Mordred was still stronger, strong enough to destroy them all. And they needed to learn that. Come, sister, give it your all. His laughter drowned in the rain. Morgan obliged. For a few seconds the two of them clashed, their swords singing a sharp and deadly song. The clangor of two blades striking against each other fused into one continuous, sonorous melody. They were too fast, too skilled. Neither could overpower the other, and those who got in their way could only flee and stare in terror and awe. But eventually, inevitably, Morgan obliterated his defenses. Her sword broke through his armor, impaling him through the chest. If it was anyone else, their heart would have been pierced. Oh, but he must have shaken her a fair bit. Enough for her to forget that her brother had been born with a rare condition that caused the position of one's organs to be reversed. So she missed his heart. Still, having a sword driven through your lung hurt a lot. It hurt terribly. Not that he cared. Instead of recoiling from the strike, Mordred pushed forward and grabbed Morgan by the neck. Her eyes widened, and she hurriedly tried to twist the sword in the wound. Her other arm was already moving to block the potential strike of his own sword. Instead of trying to use it, Mordred simply headbutted her and felt her nose crack under the force of the unexpected blow. Morgan staggered back. Blood was flowing from her broken nose, painting the lower part of her face red. "You vile scum!" Her sword, which was still lodged in his chest, scattered into a whirlwind of scarlet sparks. He couldn't help but stagger and let out a pained yelp. She was, without a doubt, going to summon it back, but that would take a few seconds at least. Not caring, Morgan lunged forward. Her leg whipped into the air, aiming to take his head clean off. Mordred blocked it with his sword and felt his sword crack. His sword broke. There was more pain. Morgan's shin cut through his sword, his armor, and his forearm. The bone broke, the muscles split, and the tendons tore. His bleeding hand fell to the ground. Not paying it any attention, Mordred stepped forward and drove his broken sword into the narrow crack between her breastplate and the segmented steel skirt, protecting her lower waist. The jagged blade plunged into his sister's side. Even though her flesh seemed as durable as steel, he pushed it as deep as he could before the broken memory disintegrated into a rain of sparks. She let out a stifled groan and pushed herself away. "I'll kill you." She tried to hide it, but there was a hint of hesitation in her voice. Morgan was winning. She was definitely winning. She had only received one serious wound, while her enemy already looked half dead. He looked like a walking corpse. So why was he so calm? What was wrong with him? She felt a chill run down her spine. Her sword was already manifesting itself back into reality. Mordred was summoning a new weapon as well. He glanced down at his severed hand and stepped over it indifferently. "No, you won't." There was a hint of finality to his words. Gritting her teeth, Morgan blocked out the pain and attacked once again. A booming thunderclap shook the world, but the bestial roar that tore through the clangor of the battlefield was much more deafening. It rolled across the ravaged land like a physical force, sapping the strength of the warriors and making them sway. Sonny, who was very close to the source of that roar, cursed under his breath as he pushed the pain aside and twisted his body to avoid being sliced by the monstrous claws of the rampaging saint. Dire Fang's hand flew past him, and while Sunny was trying to bring the Sin of Solace down on the creature's monstrous limb, Nephi's attacked from the other side, her sword turning the whipping streams of rain into boiling vapor. The two of them were like hunters fighting against a powerful beast. They circled around him and used their cooperation to make up for the gap in power, acting with the cunning and foresight that made humans so deadly. Nephi's was fighting in a way that would have made all the other Ascended freeze in stunned silence. She was just too fast, too strong, and too destructive. Her incandescent sword was hot and sharp enough to incinerate the world, and her skill and battle sense seemed to transcend the concept of limits. Sunny was no less frightening. Hidden in the tenebrous embrace of the shadow shell, he fought with the ferocious power of a true-born fiend, and used his inhuman physique to move in a way that no human could repeat, and no opponent could predict. Much more importantly, despite the stark difference between the two of them, one shrouded in burning darkness, the other suffused with beautiful light, they fought and acted as one. That combination was too lethal for a mere beast to survive. However, their enemy was not a beast, no matter how animalistic his form appeared. Dire Fang's transformation ability allowed him to become a strange hybrid between a wolf and a man. His claws, his fangs, his bestial eyes, his thick fur, as well as his inhuman rage, his savage bloodlust and his primal might, all of it made Sunny feel as though he was fighting a nightmare creature. But the Saint was not a nightmare creature. Behind all these monstrous traits hid the cold, calculating mind of a human, and as a human, he had benefited from the vast legacy of accumulated knowledge, an insight that all humans were the inheritors of. In other words, Dire Fang possessed the body of a powerful abomination, but fought with the sublime skill of a gifted human warrior. Because of the nature of his transformation, the Saint was using a strange mix of a hand-to-hand martial art and a knife-fighting technique. Only, in his case, sharp claws were playing the role of the knives, and he had 20 of them. He had a maw full of terrifying fangs as well. And the level of skill this transcendent possessed, or any transcendent really, was truly stunning. Sunny was not sure if he had ever faced an enemy with such mastery over their weapons of choice. If he did, they could probably be counted on one hand. In any case, despite the best efforts of Sunny and Nephi's, they simply couldn't bring the Saint down. They couldn't even seriously wound him, really. They were barely managing to stay alive. There were several cuts on the massive beast's body, but the two of them had received much more damage than Dire Fang. Both of their armors were battered and dented, and Sunny could taste blood on his tongue. Feeling a hint of despair crawl its way into his heart, he gritted his teeth and dashed forward to capitalize on the small window of opportunity Nephi's had created and deliver a vicious blow. The attack missed. "He's a monster." A moment later, his body shook as it was batted away by an unexpected, but perfectly executed elbow strike. The breastplate of the mantle dented and almost cracked. Nephi's launched into a reckless attack in order to buy him a little time to recover. She was going to pay for it without a doubt, but at this point, their battle was not about remaining unscathed. It was about being a little bit less broken than the enemy at the end of it. Arg! Dire Fang was powerful, Dire Fang was skilled, and worst of all, Dire Fang was strange. His battle style was too unique, too bizarre, and too deep to be deciphered in a short amount of time. It had been perfectly tailored for his monstrous transcendent form, with its contradictory physical traits and attributes, which were both human and not. He displayed a level of essence control so intricate, deliberate, and ingeniously applied that it made Sunny question his own talent. No, it was not a question of talent. It was simply the innate superiority of a higher rank multiplied by the amount of effort put into integrating essence into a combat style, both by Dire Fang himself and many battle masters of Clan Song. It was the benefit of being a vassal of a great clan. This was possibly the first dedicated essence technique Sunny had a chance to study. He had not even known that such things were possible or existed. And if all of that was not enough, Dire Fang's aspect abilities were flawlessly blended into his battle style as well. It would have been much worse if Sunny had to somehow guess the Saint's abilities first. Luckily, he had already learned them from Cassie. Dire Fang's dormant ability enhanced all his senses, especially his hearing and the sense of smell. He could even feel the tiny vibrations spreading through the ground. As a result, he had no blind spots. He also seemed to be able to predict the actions of his opponents by observing the tiniest changes in their stances, muscle contractions, eye movements, and other things Sunny had no knowledge of. His awakened ability was a physical augmentation tied to his emotional state. The angrier he got, the more pain he felt, the more powerful he would become. Things like that were usually unreliable and impossible to control, sometimes even detrimental, but Dire Fang seemed to possess absolute control over his emotions. He could summon the most murderous rage at will, while remaining perfectly cool-headed and composed. Dire Fang's ascended ability was the debilitating sonic attack, and his transcendent ability, well, it was self-evident. So, with the knowledge of that, Sunny had to come up with a way to kill him. A master killing a saint that had never happened in history. But it had to happen today. He was going to make it happen. The three of them were like an obliterating hurricane. The bloody fight between Dire Fang, Sunny, and Nephi's was no less furious and destructive than the clashes between the other saints that were happening on the battlefield, or maybe even more so. Any awakened, echo, or enthralled abomination that dared to enter the sphere of destruction created by their fight was instantly torn apart, and so soon, no one dared to any more. All the soldiers could see were dark shapes moving with dreadful speed within the rain, and billowing clouds of scalding steam that were sometimes illuminated by bright flashes of beautiful white radiance. Maybe only Kai could make out what was happening inside, due to his awakened aspect ability. I hope the fool does not rush here to help us. Sunny was trying to dismantle Dire Fang's battle style to shadow him, but his progress was too slow. Every second they spent fighting against the terrifying saint threatened to be their last, and even if they continued to remain alive, their fates would be sealed due to simple exhaustion, both of their bodies and their souls. Sunny and Nephi's possessed astonishing endurance, and their pools of essence were many times larger than those of ordinary masters. However, they still could not compete with a saint. Saints were monstrous not only because of their power and aspect abilities, but also because of how potent and vast their reserves of essence were. To masters like them, these reserves appeared nearly inexhaustible. Especially to Sunny, who was burning through his essence fast due to the shadow shell. He was never going to win the war of attrition against Dire Fang. So he had to dismantle the Saint's battle style faster, much faster, even though he could not concentrate on this task since simply staying alive demanded almost all of his attention. Not good. He grunted as Dire Fang delivered a powerful backward kick with his wolf-like hind leg, almost ripping Sunny's shell to pieces. He managed to deflect the blow, and even tried to scratch the saint with the Sin of Solace, but the jade blade got tangled in the thick fur, shearing some of it off, but leaving no trace on the enemy's skin. Sunny had already delivered a shallow cut to Dire Fang before, so the sinister whisper was supposed to be driving the saint mad. However, he showed no sign of being affected by the curse. It seemed that breaking the mind of a transcendent, which was the sharpest of weapons in and of itself, would not be easy or possible at all. Mind, the mind of a transcendent. Sunny possessed a powerful mind himself. His cognitive ability and willpower were both abnormal. There was the blessing bestowed upon him by the Shroud of Dusk as well. And yet it was not enough. Well then, suddenly he thought of something very simple. If his mind was not enough, wait, why the hell was he trying to solve the problem with only his own efforts anyway? He had a perfectly fine partner right there. Summoning chains of shadow to try and bind the savage saint, he saw most of them miss the mark, while the rest were easily torn apart and destroyed. At the same time, he sent Nephi's a mental message through the blessing of dusk. The message contained no words. There was no time for that. Instead, it was a much more crude, but also faster form of communication containing a mix of images, half-formed thoughts and emotions. For anyone else, it would have appeared as pure chaos, but Nephi's knew him too well. They were so familiar with each other that even such an unadulterated stream of concepts was enough to form an understanding. It was a bit like finishing each other's sentences or guessing each other's feelings from body language, but elevated to a completely different level. And yet it worked. Nephi seemed to understand his intention instantly and reciprocated. A flood of concepts and images poured into his head. Sonny's intention, of course, was very simple, since his own mind was not enough to dismantle Dire Fang's battle style fast enough. He wanted to join their minds together to accomplish that task faster, mostly metaphorically, but also a bit literally. Nephi's might not have possessed the unnatural ability to peer into the very essence of a being through shadow dance. But she had been doing the same thing as Sonny this whole time. Without a doubt, she had been studying the enemy, trying to discern the patterns of his battle technique to circumvent them. More than that, her insight, while not supernatural, was in no way lacking in value. It was absolutely the opposite. Neph was a genius of combat. After all, she was born and bred for battle, and there were very few people in the world who possessed the same chilling level of affinity to bloodshed and destruction as her. Sonny had his own insights about the way Dire Fang fought, and she had hers. By combining them, they would be able to enhance each other's understanding of the enemy in the same way that their powers were augmenting each other beyond the usual limits of their aspects. Hopefully. Sonny growled and continued to fight. The shadow fiend sometimes moved like a human, and sometimes like the creature that he was. He bent in strange ways, used his long arms to dash on all fours like a wild animal, and delivered attacks with the onyx spike at the end of his tail. His sword, his claws, his teeth, and his horns were all weapons, so he used them all in tandem. When that was not enough, he summoned shadows or stepped through them to attack the saint from an unexpected angle. Nephi's was pushing her body to the limit as well. Her flames burned and danced, trying to envelop their enemy or coalescing into incinerating jets that could cut through flesh and bone with frightening ease. She seemed to possess an authority over the battlefield that was almost frightening. And while they did that, they also exchanged a torrent of thoughts and concepts at tremendous speed. Sonny was sharing his knowledge, while Nephi's was sharing hers. The pieces of the puzzle were flying into his head, slotting into the grand picture with satisfying clicks. Some of them he had figured out himself, but some were new and unexpected. It seemed that Nephi's possessed a perspective that was both similar and different from his own, but no less keen. She paid attention to things that Sonny would have never thought about, and arrived at conclusions that he might have missed. The same was true in reverse. But together they missed nothing. They saw everything. It was as though they were omniscient. And with that omniscience, everything clicked in place, and the essence of Saint Dire Fang was revealed to Sonny. He hesitated for a moment, and then sent actual words to Nephi's for the first time. He said, or rather thought, "Do you trust me?" Sonny had done it. He had dismantled Dire Fang's astonishing battle style and peered into the very essence of it. The core of the saint's combat technique was laid bare, with all its components, the body, the mind, and the soul, revealed to Sonny with stark clarity. With that knowledge, he could predict what Dire Fang would do. He could even perform some of the same things, despite the difference in their aspects and physiques. And armed with that understanding, Sunny finally realized that there was no way for them to win. The fearsome saint was just too powerful, skilled, and intelligent. He held the outcome of the battle in a firm grasp, biding his time until the perfect opportunity inevitably presented itself. And their own strength was not enough to change that outcome. Even if Sunny knew that a strike was coming, he would not necessarily be fast enough to dodge it. Even if he knew the enemy's intent, he would not be strong enough to survive it. And neither would Nephi's. At least if their level of strength, already unthinkable for mere masters, remained the same. But it did not have to, did it? Do you trust me? What a loaded question. Sunny had his reasons, but it was true that he had gone against Neff's wishes in pretty much every instance where it mattered. He had abandoned her in the Dark City, refused to leave her in the Crimson Spire, and then fled from her again at the grand ball of clan valor, just to end up by her side anyway. It was a bit funny and a bit sad, but most of all, Sunny wasn't sure if she did actually trust him. He wasn't even sure if he himself would have trusted him. The same was true the other way around. And yet, as far as he could see, that was their only chance to emerge from this fight alive. If he could only prove to her somehow that. I do. What? The calm answer came almost instantly. It startled him. Huh. Sunny dashed away to avoid being caught in the saint's maw, dove under lightning-fast claws, and barely managed to get out of the way of a stream of billowing white flame that covered his retreat. Well, that makes things easier. He called upon a certain memory and sent Nephi's a short thought. Then in about 5 seconds, give it all to me. 5 seconds was the amount of time needed for the memory to manifest itself. It was not a very large amount of time. But in a battle against a saint, it was like an eternity. Sunny had long pushed himself to his limits, and then well past them. Even while empowered by the shadow shell and augmented both by his shadows and Neff's flame, he could feel the terrible strain of the battle slowly breaking his body down. It was already in a bad state, and would only continue to crumble as time went on. However, it had not broken yet. Gritting his teeth, Sunny threw himself into the furious crucible of battle. Dire Fang's massive body moved with dreadful speed, each of his limbs posing a fatal threat. His attacks were vicious, devastating, and explosive, but also perfectly timed and chillingly calculated. Sunny knew when they would come and from where, but despite that, it was not easy to withstand the savage barrage of lethal blows unleashed by the monstrous beast. The ground split and trembled around them, and the clouds of steam created by Neff's flames obscured everything around. And yet he did withstand it. Exactly 5 seconds later, Sunny pushed himself off the muddy ground with 3 hands and flew forward, the tip of the sin of solace aimed at Dire Fang's neck. The saint easily dodged it and retaliated with a powerful blow, which Sunny awkwardly blocked. He let out a pained scream and was thrown backward, in the direction where Nephi's was rising from her knees. Sunny landed on his feet and struggled to maintain his balance as he slid through the mud. He might have fallen, but she stepped forward and supported him from behind, placing a hand on his back. Both of them were standing, but they had lost the advantage of surrounding the enemy from 2 sides. Worse than that, they were both in the single line of attack now, Nephi's hidden behind the towering figure of the Shadow Fiend. Dire Fang's bestial eyes ignited with satisfied malice. And at the same time, Sunny's 5th shadow, as well as all of Neff's flame, poured from her hand and into his shell, leaving her entirely exposed, but gifting him with twice the amount of physical augmentation. Instantly, his power exploded. His strength, his speed, his endurance, his agility, all of it soared to heights that Sunny had never experienced before. The two of them had experimented with augmenting each other in his basement, but he had not invented the shadow shell yet back then. Now, all the parts came together to create a truly terrifying combination. Of course, it was not the smartest of tactics. By making one of them exceedingly strong while leaving the other one weak, they were giving Dire Fang a perfect opportunity to get rid of the weaker enemy first, and then deal with the other one without being encumbered by the numerical disadvantage. But that was only true if the Saint survived long enough to figure out what happened. Sunny was not planning on giving him such a chance. He had to finish this fight in one exchange. So, I don't just need to kill a saint, I also need to kill him with one strike. Well, isn't it wonderful? There was no more time to think. Only to kill. Sunny cleared his mind of all unnecessary thoughts, except for one, an axiom he knew too well. The essence of combat is murder. He was going to murder Saint Dire Fang, the vassal of the great clan Song, right here and now. There was no doubt or hesitation, no room for failure, only certainty. The terrifying, towering beast in front of him opened his maw, ready to let out a deafening roar. Feeling the polished ivory of the bone singer manifest itself into his hand, Sunny flooded his body with smoldering essence and lunged forward. Time was moving very slowly. No, it was Sunny who was moving too fast. It almost felt as if the world had frozen. The rain was suspended in the air. The fountains of mud had grown still. The distant figures of dying awakened were like grotesque statues. In this nearly static world, only two things seemed unbound by paralysis: the monstrous saint in front of him, who was no slower than Sunny himself, and a bolt of lightning that was crawling across the sky, extending toward the ground as it forked and illuminated the bloody battlefield. Faster! Suddenly, a deafening roar exploded from Dire Fang's mouth, strangely distorted and haunting. It would have hit Sunny like a wall. But he was prepared. The silenced enchantment of the emerald bone flute activated, creating a dome of absolute silence around him. Sunny passed through the sorcerous roar without being struck by its crushing power. However, behind him, Nephis had to endure its full weight without the protection of her flames. Stripped of their augmentation, she couldn't resist it like she had before. Erasing the image of her falling figure from his mind, Sunny concentrated on the task. If anything, the importance of success had only become more stark now that his partner was debilitated. If he failed, both of them were going to die. But he had already rejected the possibility of failure. He was going to win. He was going to do what he promised to do. He was going to kill a damned saint. At that moment, Dire Fang was more than a chance adversary to Sunny. He was the embodiment of everything Sunny wanted to destroy: the rotten authority of the great clans, the vile curse of the chain of nightmares, the torturous brand of powerlessness that he bore on his soul ever since Falcon Scott. The inescapable shackles of fate. He was the enemy, a terrifying enemy, an overwhelmingly powerful enemy, an enemy that was nearly impossible to defeat. But if Sunny somehow did manage to defeat him, then maybe he would be able to overcome the other impossible obstacles that pressed him into the ground one day. Sunny was tired of losing. He had lost in the Antarctic Center, and now, because of Mordred and his cursed schemes, he was on the verge of losing here in East Antarctica as well. And so, he was willing to bet everything on this one strike. He had no choice but to finish it all with one strike, not only because Nephis was weakened and vulnerable right now, but also because of the nature of the aspect powers Dire Fang possessed. The saint's already terrifying physical might was augmented by rage and pain. If Sunny delivered him a serious wound but failed to make it fatal, then that augmentation would only explode further, turning his enemy into a truly unstoppable monster. He only had one chance. Sunny had already accomplished 3 incredible feats to earn that single chance. He had learned the secrets of Dire Fang's aspect, deciphered the battle style of the transcendent monster, and found a way to counteract his debilitating sonic attack. Now, all that remained was to cut him down with a sword. Not that it would be easy. The saint was not waiting passively to be killed. He was already moving, rushing forward with speed that exceeded all reason. His claws were ready to tear Sunny apart, and his fangs were ready to sink into Sunny's flesh. Even though the gap of power between them had narrowed tremendously, Dire Fang still had an edge in terms of strength, weight, and sheer size. But that was all right. As a survivor of the Forgotten Shore, Sunny was a master of killing things that were larger and more powerful than him. And while he had absorbed the essence of Dire Fang's battle style into Shadow Dance, the Saint had not gotten a firm grasp of his own technique yet. How could he, when Sunny's technique was as formless and shapeless as shadows? All Dire Fang could do was try and predict how his enemy would act based on his formidable experience of participating in countless battles. However, there was a problem with that approach, too. That was because the Saint had never fought a shadow spawn before. He was still judging Sunny as if Sunny was a mere human. But while Sunny still considered himself a human, he was also a bit more. As the two of them closed the distance, prepared to strike, Sunny used the inherent flexibility of a shadow dance practitioner to bend his body in an extreme and almost unnatural way. At the same time, he used the physical characteristics of his fiendish shell to switch from running on 2 feet to a low, beast-like gait. As a result, the Saint's claws tore through the raindrops above his head, while his momentum remained the same. Sunny gritted his teeth and let out a bestial growl, as he used all his prodigious strength to push himself off the ground and leap into the air. Dire Fang was too fast and skilled to allow the unexpected attack to reach its mark, though. A split second before Sunny could bring his sword down on the Saint's neck. A massive clawed hand pushed forward, catching him in the chest. The power of that blow was too terrible. The onyx of the mantle cracked and exploded, as if struck by 5 transcendent swords. The manifested shadows comprising the Shadow Fiend's shell were instantly sliced and torn apart. In an instant, the shadow spawn was mutilated beyond recognition. The upper portion of his torso was entirely destroyed, exploding into a fountain of darkness. His horned head was severed and flew into the air. 2 of his 4 arms were ripped off. The entire mangled carcass was thrown back. The Sin of Solace slipped from his fingers. That was the thing, though. The shell of the Shadow Fiend was a towering monstrosity that stood at almost 3 meters of height. Sunny, meanwhile, was a young man of a rather modest stature. So he could easily change the internal structure of the shell in a way that would allow him to sacrifice the upper portion of it while remaining perfectly unscathed. Almost at the same time as Dire Fang's claws tore through the upper chest and neck of the Shadow Fiend, the whole shell suddenly lost its coherence, starting to dissolve back into the ethereal shadows. And just below the harrowing cut, the top of Sunny's head was revealed. The dissipating shell was thrown back by the strike, but his own body, freed from its embrace, continued to fly forward like a bullet. Time stood still. Catching the hilt of the Sin of Solace with his own human hand, Sunny used the tremendous augmentation of shadow and flame to fill his muscles with dreadful strength, and drove the tip of his sword into the Saint's bestial eye. Under the relentless onslaught of rain, blood was being washed off the shattered armor of a beautiful young woman with black hair and vermilion eyes. She swayed, trying to lash out with her cracked sword, but slipped in the mud and fell heavily to one knee. Her breathing was hoarse, and her lips were painted crimson with blood. Mordred looked much worse than his sister. One of his eyes was gone, turning his face into a grotesque mask. So was one of his hands. His armor was on the verge of collapsing into a whirlwind of sparks, and terrible wounds covered his body, revealing flesh and bone. and yet his expression was calm. "Ah, it hurts. I haven't felt pain like that in a long, long time." He was growing weak because of blood loss, his vision turning blurry. But he was so close to his goal after long, excruciating years. The first true taste of his revenge was so near. So Mordred took a step forward, and then another. His sword rose. His hand was firm and unshaken. Morgan looked up at him, and the look in her eyes was sweeter than nectar. Confusion, indignation, and hidden behind them, a hint of fear. How are you still standing, monster?" Mordred smiled. "Barely." He was not going to engage in a lengthy conversation with her. Not yet. He knew that his sister was just trying to buy time. Using one of the enchantments absorbed by her body, she was trying to heal herself. Her wounds were already closing, and she was not bleeding nearly as heavily as she was supposed to. It was not going to save her, though. Morgan might have been able to heal herself, but she couldn't replenish her essence, her focus, and her stamina. She was tired, and that fatigue was only going to get worse. It was going to seep into her bones and into her mind, dooming her. He just had to last a little bit longer than that. His sister gathered what little remained of her strength and dashed forward with a furious growl. Her sword flashed, sharp and cunning, aiming for his neck. Mordred knew that he wouldn't be able to block or evade it, so he didn't. Instead, he just shifted his torso slightly, allowing the sharp edge to cut into his clavicle instead of his neck, endured the blinding flash of pain, and drove his own sword into a crack in her armor. Morgan groaned. Before she could do anything, he swung the bloodied stump of his right hand, hitting her in the temple with the torn edge of the steel vambrace. His sister was thrown back, dazed. Mordred felt a bit lightheaded, too. A long sigh escaped from his lips. "Ugh." Through the veil of rain covering the battlefield, he could see what was happening around them. Clan Song was losing. The titanic worm was battered and mutilated, but 3 out of the 4 of his reflections had already been destroyed. The last one, the one wearing Whispering Blade's face, was not going to last much longer either. Saint Madoc himself was close to prevailing in his harrowing battle against Beastmaster. Silent Stalker and Summer Night were still fighting, both stubbornly refusing to admit defeat. At this rate, both of them would perish, and even if the taciturn daughter of Kai Song prevailed, she wouldn't be able to continue participating in the battle. Even the reflection of Sir Gilead seemed to be failing against one of Nether's children that Sunless had somehow made his. The scoundrel himself, meanwhile. Mordred felt the desire to raise an eyebrow, but he was too weak and tired to do that. Direfang is dead. Sunless and the Dreamspawn killed a saint. This was a terrible, disastrous piece of news, but he couldn't help but feel impressed. Good for them. Morgan tried to stand up, and he pushed her into the mud again with a cruel strike of his sword. There was more pain, and it was suddenly hard for him to keep balance. By now, their clash looked nothing like a noble duel between 2 royal descendants. It was simply a brutal, graceless, vicious brawl, but Mordred liked it more that way. It was much more sincere, much more honest. Why would murder look pretty when it was so ugly? His sister was still refusing to give up. They clashed several more times, and each time Mordred was on the losing end of the exchange. Until he wasn't. At some point, somehow, almost unexplainably, he gained the initiative in this abhorrent dance of theirs. And once he did, his advantage grew like an avalanche. No matter how many wounds he had accumulated, no matter how terribly Morgan hurt him, Mordred was unshaken. His one remaining eye glimmered, reflecting her dwindling confidence. And then, after a while, Morgan fell and failed to stand up again. Growling, she struck the ground with her first. I don't understand. How are you? What trick?" He smiled, dragging his aching body toward her. Now was the time to talk. not only because Morgan had finally exhausted all her monstrous reserves, but also because he was tired, as well. He needed a few moments to catch his breath and prepare for the final strike. You don't understand. Oh, but it is so simple. There is no trick. Yes, you are stronger than me, faster than me. You are maybe even more skilled than me. However, dear sister, I am infinitely superior to you in one aspect, the most important aspect. He struggled against the weight of his sword, which was suddenly unbearable, and gritted his teeth. It's desire. Don't you know that everything has its beginnings in desire? And my desire, it's infinitely more powerful than yours. That is why I am more powerful than you. That is all there is, sister. Oh, and my desire is also much more pure. Can't she see? Well, she's young after all. Mordred reached the spot where Morgan was trying to get up from the mud and ruthlessly kicked her in the side with his armored boot. She yelped and fell back down. He looked at her coldly. You see, my only desire is to kill you. But you want so many things. You want to kill and imprison me, but you also want to survive killing and imprisoning me. You want to protect your neck from being cut, your heart from being pierced, your skull from being crushed, your eyes from being gouged out. All these countless desires weigh you down. They are a burden that reduces your strength, dulls your skill, and diminishes your speed. But me, I have no such burden. I only care about one thing. I only want to kill you. That is why you are weak and I am strong. Mordred used his one remaining eye to glance at the bloody stump of his right hand, at his broken armor, and at his mangled body. His gaze was indifferent. And that is why my wish will come true, but yours will not. Without wasting any more time, he smiled bitterly and raised his sword. His goal was so close, he just had to bring the sword down. However, he never did. Somewhere else on the battlefield, a sword made of pure darkness pierced a figure made of blinding sunshine. The radiant knight staggered, while the tenebrous knight stood calmly, looking at him with two indifferent crimson eyes. Saint twisted her sword, and the darkness contained within it seemed to expand, hungrily devouring the shine of her enemy. The reflection of summer night grew dimmer and convulsed, as if trying to scream. However, no scream could be heard. The radiant figure grew bleak and translucent. A moment later, a net of cracks suddenly appeared on the surface of the dying light, and then, with a faint sound of breaking mirrors, the reflection exploded into countless shards of silver glass. Saint indifferently retracted her sword and shifted her gaze, searching for a new opponent. Separated from her by a vast distance, a gargantuan worm brought its monstrous weight down and then twisted, catching something invisible in its maw. The countless creatures comprising the echo slithered, grinding the invisible foe into dust. In the heart of the battlefield, obscured by rain, a beautiful demoness screamed as her face was cut by an unseen blade. She staggered back and fell, crimson tears rolling to the ground. In front of her, a vague silhouette was suddenly outlined by the streams of falling water and the brilliance of flashing lightning. A cold, ruthless voice came from the rain. Stupid girl, you should have stayed sweet and innocent like you were before. Beastmaster gritted her teeth. I'm not done yet, old man. You haven't won yet. The rain laughed. Die now, this little scuffle of ours was fun. You have slain a transcendent human, Dire Fang. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received. The towering monstrosity swayed, the spark of life disappearing from his eyes. Sunny, who had driven the sin of solace into the saint's skull up to the hilt, was perched precariously on the beast's snout, holding onto the gray fur with one hand. He froze for a moment. I won. The body of Dire Fang tilted and then toppled. Since the saint's transcendent form was quite high, there was considerable distance to the ground. Sunny rode it all the way down, still holding on to the hilt of the sin of solace. The giant beast crashed, causing the ground to tremble. Still in shock, Sonny retrieved his sword and stood up, glancing at the battlefield from atop the felled giant. I won. Then he lost his footing and rolled into the mud. The mud felt cool and pleasant to the touch. Behind him, the massive carcass rippled and shrunk, slowly turning into the corpse of a man. Sonny lingered for a few moments, trying to comprehend the fact that he, lost from light, had really slain a saint. It was so strange. He could still vividly remember the day when the Night Temple had been destroyed. Back then, the appearance of Saint Cormac had filled his heart with indescribable dread. The following battle between Cormac and Sky Tide was even more terrifying. He felt like an ant that had gotten stuck in the middle of a clash between two gods. The entire island had been destroyed by their ferocious battle. It all had seemed apocalyptic. And now Sonny had killed a similar being himself. He had killed a saint with his own two hands in combat. Of course, he didn't do it alone. Nephi's. Suddenly startled, Sonny jumped to his feet and dashed to the spot where he had seen her last. She was still there, struggling to stand up. Her helmet was gone, and he could see drops of blood falling from her ears, her nose, and even her eyes. Her face was pale, with damp hair sticking to it in thin strands. Neph. He slid on the mud and fell to his knees near her, placing his hands on her shoulders. She let out a raspy breath, and then shakily rose to her feet with his help. Sonny felt the warmth of the white flame flowing from his body into hers. Slowly, her skin ignited with radiance, and wisps of white flame escaped from beneath it. The scratches on her face disappeared, and the stakes of blood evaporated, leaving it pale and pristine. A pained groan escaped from her lips, and Nephi swayed. He supported her. She remained silent for a bit, trying to contain the pain, and then asked, "And we won." Sonny let out a relieved sigh. "Yeah, he's dead." She winced. "I'm good." He wanted to laugh. "Good, good, that's all you have to say." Nephi's looked at him for a few moments. Her face was too close, but Sonny didn't mind. Then a corner of her mouth slightly curled up. Why make a fuss? It was just a saint. He stared at her, feeling a sense of triumph flood his heart. But then, the smile slowly disappeared from Sonny's face. Separated from them by the wicked havoc of the battle, a blind girl was standing in the middle of a vast circle of corpses, drops of blood falling from her rapier and her armor. Behind her, a woman with golden hair and amber eyes was leaning heavily on a spear. Suddenly, the blind girl shivered and lowered her sword. Her shoulders fell. Turning around, she ignored the rushing enemies and looked up at the cloud-ridden sky. Her exquisitely beautiful face was solemn. Mordred raised his sword, ready to strike his sister down. But then he froze. His strange, mirror-like eyes trembled. As if forgetting about Morgan, he slowly turned around and looked at the sky with a grim expression. The smile slowly disappeared from Sonny's lips. The wind was cold. In the flash of lightning, he suddenly looked paler than a ghost. His face fell. Nephi's frowned. "Sonny, what's wrong?" He looked frightened. Without answering, Sonny slowly turned away from her and looked up with an expression of utter terror. I don't know, something is wrong." His voice drowned in a deafening thunderclap. Neph hesitated for a moment, then traced his gaze and looked up at the sky. There didn't seem to be anything there, except for a strange, rippling darkness. For a few moments, the battlefield seemed to grow still. And then the sky crumbled and split apart, devoured by an abyssal rift that seemed to be leading to the very depths of hell. A gargantuan nightmare gate tore the world into pieces, dwarfing the battlefield as it cut through the sky and manifested itself into existence. The sky parted, sliced through by a narrow vertical rift. Behind it, the fabric of reality made way for a dark, harrowing abyss of nothingness. Both light and darkness seemed to be twisted and changed near the gate, breaking as they were destroyed. The rift dwarfed the entire battlefield, stretching for hundreds and hundreds of meters into the shattered sky. The abandoned outpost and the black fissure of the Nightmare Gate that led to the vicinity of the Black Skull looked tiny and insignificant in front of it. An invisible shockwave rolled outward from the point where the gargantuan rift touched the ground, exerting an almost irresistible force. Sonny braced himself, but still staggered as the wave passed through him, barely managing to stay on his feet. His mind was drowned by the deafening, cacophonous howling of the call. It was many times louder, more unbearable, and maddeningly demanding than it had ever been before. Sonny desperately resisted the overwhelming desire to submit. All around them, the awakened warriors screamed as they grabbed their heads and fell to their knees. Their eyes were wide open, but unseeing. Some were bleeding, and some seemed to be crawling toward the gate. Some were thrown to the ground by the shockwave. The invisible force made no distinction between those serving valor and those serving song. They were all the same in the face of the harrowing rift. Mundane humans, if any had come to witness this battle, would have been outright killed by the pressure of the gate. Sonny staggered back and looked up at it in terror. His lips moved. It's a Category 4 Nightmare Gate. And just as he said those words, the world shook again, and another rift tore through the sky. The world convulsed, and one more sliced the fabric of reality apart. Like three dark pillars holding up the heavens, or three vile spears cruelly thrust into the flesh of the world, three colossal nightmare gates surrounded the battlefield, cutting out all paths of retreat. Not that there was a way to escape them. The three armies, the valiant warriors of Clan Valor, the fearless soldiers of Clan Song, and those awakened of the evacuation army that had come as escorts of Saint Cor, were trapped between the abhorrent black rifts. And then, something vast moved in the abyssal darkness of the first gate. Those who had enough presence of mind left to see witnessed something shift within the Nightmare Gate. A moment later, giant fingers suddenly pushed from it into the waking world, each as large as a tower. There were dozens of them, all dark and strangely human-like, with black, broken fingernails and torn, calloused skin. The fingers felt around blindly, then grabbed the edges of the vertical rift and strained, as if trying to pull it wider. The most horrifying part of it all was that they succeeded. The world trembled, and a net of black cracks seemed to spread through the sky. Then, the gaping wound of the Nightmare Gate was torn open, and a seething mass of the same dark flesh flowed out of it like an appalling avalanche. The flesh expanded, turning into gargantuan black tentacles, which then shot forward with stunning speed. Sonny took a step back, his eyes widened. Somewhere far away from him, on the opposite side of the battlefield, the towering tortoise Echo was ripped apart with a single swing of a black tentacle. The awakened sheltered in the stone fort on its carapace were thrown into the air, and the transcendent creature instantly exploded into a whirlwind of sparks. Someplace else, the tentacles reached the massive figure of the titanic worm. The titan rose its repulsive body into the air to meet them, but a moment later, it was torn to shreds, destroyed, and consumed, disappearing without a trace. A scrawny figure jumped onto the back of a black steed, who then raced away. A split second later, the reflection of Silent Stalker disappeared under the tide of dark flesh, and a faint sound of breaking glass rang quietly. Most shocking of all, not too far away from the gate, Beastmaster suddenly staggered back from the vague figure outlined in front of her, blood flowing from her mangled face. A moment later, a black tentacle whipped through the empty air with terrible speed, and a fountain of blood suddenly bloomed where the vague figure had stood a moment ago. There was no time to react, and no chance to escape. Pieces of torn flesh became visible as they splattered all around, unrecognizable as parts of a human being. Just like that, Saint Madoc, the Whispering Blade, brother of the King of Swords and an elder of the great clan Valor, was no more. He was dead. Far away, Sonny and Nephi's watched the world end in stunned silence. It's a great terror, a great titan. Sonny shivered, hypnotized by the terrible sight of a great nightmare creature forcing its way into the waking world. Everything he had known seemed meaningless in front of it. The mere thought of trying to resist felt futile. That was when the darkness within the other two gates moved, as well. He considered his chances of outrunning the tide of corrupted and great abominations that would enter the waking world in mere moments. Even with nightmare and shadow step, the chances were zero. If even the saints were obliterated in seconds, a master like him had no chance at all. Nephi suddenly shuddered and then grabbed him by the shoulder. Her lips parted. Realm escaping into the dream realm, that is the only way. He stared at her with hollow eyes, trying to understand the meaning of these words. What is she on about? Then, with tremendous effort, Sonny forced himself to calm down and regain his composure. He could barely think again. Escaping into the dream realm. That was indeed a chance. No one knew what they would find there, but it could very well be better than being trapped between 3 Category 4 nightmare gates. At least that way, there was a possibility of survival. Here there was only death. Or something much worse. The problem was that the process of traveling between worlds was not instantaneous. It took time to open the door between the waking world and the dream realm, and even more time to step through. Would they be fast enough to escape? There is only one way to find out. Staring at the great horror slowly pushing its vast body through the broken abyssal rift, Sonny took a deep breath and tried to feel his dream realm anchor. Sonny and Nephi stood side by side as they watched utter devastation being unleashed by the creature crawling out of the colossal nightmare gate. The gargantuan black tentacles were still far away, but they were getting closer with every moment. Numerous awakened had already been killed, and more were going to die soon. It was too sudden, too much. There were a lot of things that Sonny needed to comprehend, accept, and think about the future, Cassie, Effie, and Kai Jet. But there was no time to think. It was almost impossible, anyway. The call was roaring in his mind, making any kind of thought difficult. All he could do right now was concentrate on his own survival. One thing Sonny did do, however, was dismiss his shadows. They would be of no help against the great being, but losing them to this catastrophe was just too easy. Ruined, it's all ruined. Sonny tried to sense his connection to the dream realm. As a master, he could leave the waking world at will. It took some time to activate the connection, and usually he would be transported to his anchor citadel in a matter of minutes. That was not going to happen today, of course. Being in close proximity to a nightmare gate disturbed the anchor, so entering the dream realm near them meant being pulled by the call and entering the area surrounding the seed instead. Currently, Sonny was in the area of effect of 4 different nightmare gates. He didn't even know which seed he would be pulled to, but anything was better than remaining on the desolate plain that was going to be flooded with indescribably powerful abominations very soon. Hurry, hurry, hurry. In front of him, a scene out of a nightmare was playing out. No one on the battlefield was strong enough to resist the being unleashed by the nightmare gate. All they could do was try to run, fail, and die. Those who succumbed to the call could not even run. Scores of awakened, echoes, and enthralled abominations were all being torn apart and pulverized. The seething mass of dark flesh, meanwhile, continued to squeeze itself through the gate. The black fingers continued to hold the rift apart, but there was also a gargantuan hand that had emerged from the abyssal nothingness entirely, plunging down to grab a fistful of screaming humans. I need to succumb to the call as well. Sonny had spent it was close to 8 months. By now, the last 8 months having his mind almost constantly assaulted by the insidious whispers of the call. Sometimes they were loud, and sometimes they were quiet enough to seem nearly absent. It had been hard to deal with the maddening pressure at first, but slowly he developed a sort of resistance to the call. He had learned how to fight it. But now, in a bizarre turn of events, he had to surrender to it. It was a frightening and uncomfortable feeling, the feeling of releasing control. There, he sensed it, his connection to the dream realm. Strange and distorted, it was still there. In fact, it was much stronger than before. The whispers of the call grew even more deafening, screaming, demanding for him to make use of it. Feeling a strange ecstasy and an immense sense of relief flood his mind, Sonny submitted to their will. Concentrating, he pulled on the connection and felt the border between the two worlds becoming weaker and more ethereal. Before, it had been like an impregnable wall, but now it was more akin to fog, and he was slowly entering that fog. It was as though something was pulling him from the other side, or maybe expelling him from this one. And that was it. That was all he could do. Now, Sonny just had to hold on to that feeling and hope that he would leave the waking world before the great and terrible being entering. It squashed him like one would a bug. The three colossal gates stretched into the broken sky like festering wounds. The dark tentacles were rampaging on the battlefield. Some whipped around, obliterating the armies of the great clans. Some plunged into the soil and grew taut, pulling more and more of the great abomination into the waking world. Sonny and Nephi stood motionless amidst the harrowing destruction. They did not try to run or search for shelter. There was nowhere to run, anyway, and no shelter to be found. The spot where they had fought Dire Fang was as good as any other. It was all up to chance now. Turning away from the black tentacles that were getting closer and closer, they looked at each other. Sonny felt the ground under his feet quake, the tremors growing stronger and stronger. It was as though something was approaching them, shaking the world with each heavy step. He didn't even look to see what was appearing from the other two gates. Instead, he just looked at Nephi's. She was pale and weakened but seemed calm. She always seemed calm, even when she wasn't. After a few moments, Sonny opened his mouth, which was suddenly excruciatingly dry, and said, "I'll see you on the other side." Nephi's looked back at him, something grotesque and lumbering reflecting in her striking gray eyes. She nodded. "Yes." Then she hesitated for a second and took a deep breath. "Sonny, I need to tell you something." He gritted his teeth, suddenly frightened that what she was going to say would sound like a farewell. Nevertheless, he forced himself to ask. "What?" Neff lingered for a bit. Then, as the ground under them trembled violently, she suddenly looked away. What she said next was entirely unexpected. "The projector back in your house, it didn't really explode by itself. I lied. Actually, I broke it, so I'm really sorry." Sonny stared at her in disbelief. His mind short-circuited for a moment. How is her tone so what? He blinked and then scoffed. Why the hell? However, he did not finish the sentence. Suddenly, the world disappeared and Sonny saw, or rather, perceived, a boundless void. It was the familiar, empty void between dream and reality. A moment later, he was suddenly blinded by bright sunlight and assaulted by unbearable heat. Falling on something soft and scorching, Sonny rolled and frantically tried to sense the surrounding space through the shadows. The battle was now behind him. He had reached the Nightmare Desert. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.